short Zoom, seeing how we have our little documentary that we need to watch today to review Unit 3, especially human demography. And I'll show you guys that video here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. And let's take a look at our checklist, right? So last night you didn't have any TQs and you don't have any TQs tonight either, right? So you should be able to allocate some time to kind of review Unit 3, and you should be more than prepared for tomorrow's progress check, right? Which again, act as our exams. What we're going to do today is I'm going to review Unit 3 really quickly. I'm going to kind of go back over some of the ideas that you guys had yesterday about ways in which we can control TFR, whether we want to increase it, decrease it, and then you'll have plenty of time to watch this documentary because I'm going to try to keep this Zoom really, really short. And this documentary is amazing, right? It's Hans Rosling. And so part of the documentary, you know, he's out and about in the field, you know, visiting all these different countries. And then he's just a great presenter, right? And I would highly suggest watching this for many reasons. You know, first and foremost, we're learning about human demography. And secondly, again, trying to expanding your worldview, right? Kind of changing the misconceptions that you have about the world. And I think more importantly, and it's because I really enjoy the way in which Hans presents information, the power of effective communication, right? You know, I know Hans Rosling's an old man with a funny little accent, but I think he does such a good job of presenting information in such a profound and impactful way that can be meaningful to everybody, not just his fellow colleagues, not just other scientists and demographers, but for the everyday person. And I think that's what we need to advocate for in the future for science, right? Because we need to increase scientific literacy in our country so that people can better understand the scientific issues in our societies so they can be more well-informed. So when they go to the polls to vote, they can have informed decisions about these scientific matters. So let's pick up where we left off yesterday, right? Talking about ways in which we can decrease and increase total fertility rates. And, you know, I really have to say, guys, I was really, really impressed with, for the most part, y'all's participation, right? There's a couple of y'all that I can already see, you know, future leaders, presenters, just great public speakers, effective communicators in this group. And I'm really looking forward to, you know, being in a more traditional classroom setting and having more class discussions on a daily basis, whether it's actually in the classroom or out in the field, right? So please don't ever hesitate to, you know, share your thoughts, share your perspective, right? I want to hear from you guys. I want you to question everything I say. I want you to go against the grain. I want you to try to think creatively, think outside of the box, and not be afraid to propose wild ideas, right? Because this is a safe space for creativity. All right. Let's look at the ways in which we can decrease total fertility. Right. Obviously, contraceptives, and it can be something as simple as a condom or something as complicated as an IUD or an injectable. Right. And there's lots of different ways, and not to mention, it's not all contraceptives are primarily focused on women. Right. There's obviously surgical procedures where individuals can be more or less fixed. Right. Spay and neutered like you would your dog or cat. You know, for women, they can get their fallopian tubes tied, or for men, they can get a vasectomy, right? And so these are surgical procedures. So after someone has had, it's like, okay, I wanted 2 kids, I've had 2 kids, then the male can decide to have a vasectomy, right? And it's a surgical procedure that more or less would prevent that individual from having any future offspring. Raising healthcare costs. I don't know if you'd really want to intentionally raise healthcare costs, especially in our country when they're already astronomical. And, you know, I don't know how well this would work per se, because in some countries where there is no healthcare at all, people are still having children. More urbanization. This would definitely work. And we have seen this over the past couple decades in a lot of countries where, you know, urban cities are developing. More and more people are moving to the city to pursue work and just to pursue a different way of life. You know, maybe they're a 4th, 5th, 6th generation farmer and they've seen how hard their parents have worked, and maybe they just want a different lifestyle. And people generally, when they move to the city, decide to have fewer children because there's less space and everything's a little bit more expensive. Improve employment for women. Yeah, right. So if we can provide more socioeconomic opportunities for women, right? We can give them a choice, right? They'll decide that, I can make a living for myself, right? I don't have to appease this man by giving him children. And believe it or not, y'all, in some countries, culturally, that's how they view women, right? Their value is in the fact that they can provide children, right? And that needs to change, right? Because there needs to be a greater sense of equality, right? If the man can go and get a bachelor's degree and a graduate degree and a doctorate degree and have a wonderful career, so should the woman. And by offering those opportunities to women and allowing them to exercise some choice, absolutely, we can decrease total fertility rates. The government can influence having fewer children, for sure, right? We've all probably heard of the one child per family policy in China. And, that really kind of as intense and as serious and as morally, ethically questionable as it worked, right? So China was experiencing some famine, and their demographers were making some population projections. And they're like, if we don't do something and we don't do something quick, we're going to have a major problem. But they didn't necessarily do it right? So there's a lot we can learn from their one child per family policy, because now they've gotten an overabundance of men, very few women. And so now they're struggling. They're looking into the future like, okay, what are we going to do about this? There's a lot of ways we can do this that maybe are not so authoritarian, if you will, right? We talked about yesterday about creating tax incentives. If you have children, then you're falling into this tax bracket, and that could potentially, make it detrimental, right? So it's like, okay, if you have no children, then you're in the lowest tax bracket, and then every child that you add from that point forward, there'd be more taxes to pay. And then, that's a reason why the TFR would decrease, but we don't necessarily want to make life unaffordable. All right, so let's go down here. And there's a lot of other things, just family planning in general, sitting people down with paper and pencil and saying, how much money do you and your spouse make? How much money do you guys make? What are you putting into retirement? How much money could you set aside for taking care of a child realistically, right? And it's family planning meets financial planning, right? Can you financially support this child and give this child the life that you so desire? Okay, how can we increase total fertility rates? Right? So, one of the things they talked about yesterday was limiting contraceptive use. But again, that's a slippery slope, right? We never want to deny people choice. I could definitely see a lot of societal backlash, right? And saying, no, sorry, we need to increase population, no more contraceptives for you. Again, maybe, taking the educational route and approaching the people and saying, guys, listen, we have so many elderly people and such a small working class, right? Who is going to financially carry the burden in the future, right? Get people start to think about the future and, the rising cost of healthcare and those social programs that are supported by young workers to allow people to retire, right? You could almost say, hey, listen, if you don't have any children, the age of retirement is going to go up, right? And the age of retirement has been going up, right? Steadily in a lot of countries, because they're looking and they're saying, oh, man, we need to keep people working, right? What's really neat, we'll actually talk about that later. Yes, we could change immigration. Believe it or not, Japan is probably one of the most difficult countries in the world to get a visa for, right? It's very, very difficult to become a citizen of that country, right? And so if they can change some of those laws and legislations, they may have individuals, joining the workforce and seeking a better opportunity for themselves. And who knows, maybe Japan will change. Maybe Japan will be like Alaska and maybe offer a financial incentive for people who are educated and willing to have children to come to their country. You could decrease the marketing campaigns for contraceptives, but I would say increase the marketing campaigns for encouraging families, right? Try to make people feel supported in their decision to have children. Right. And I think one of the biggest things, and I really like this idea right here, is build family-friendly housing, right? Areas where families can feel comfortable starting a family, right? They're like, okay, I can afford to live here. There's a nice playground. Maybe there's an elementary school integrated into the apartment facility. And maybe that's one of the prerequisites. You can come live here and it's really cheap. But the prerequisite is you have to have children, right? And so the children have people to play with. It'd be a nice, safe community, everyone looking out for everyone, and they would feel supported by their society and maybe even potentially their government. We talked about lowering the price of necessary goods like formula and diapers. That could definitely encourage people to have children. this one right here, getting rid of abortion, again, it's a controversial topic. We're not going to get into whether it's right or wrong, right? We have to kind of take a stand back because we're scientists and say, okay, would this really be the right answer? Because again, we want people to buy into our program. We don't want people to feel ostracized, backed into a corner, or targeted. Because historically speaking, when you put in acts of legislation like that, or when you try to, oppress certain groups of people or take decisions away from people, there's a lot of societal backlash. And you could have the exact opposite effect of what you were intending. But this was a problem, in some parts of the world, actually, it's not legal for you to find out what the gender of your offspring is, right? And those like ultrasound, is it a boy or is it a girl? Some places they're illegal because their worry is that if it's a girl, that they may choose to abort, which is crazy. It's ridiculous. But unfortunately, in some countries, when women and men are not seen equals. Lower expense of medical, yes, right? If just healthcare in general was affordable, guys. If I don't know if you know anything about it, but after this, I want you to Google average cost of an ambulance ride. So imagine being a pregnant woman, your water breaks, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I have to get to the hospital right now. And maybe your husband's at work, maybe your significant other's at work, whatever. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't drive myself right now. I'm going into contractions. You call 911, that ambulance ride, I want you to go and Google it. The average cost of an ambulance ride, and your jaw is going to hit the ground. So that's just the money that you would spend to get to the hospital, right? And then you're going to be in the emergency room, and everything in the emergency room is way more expensive, right? You're talking like Band-Aids for like $18, right? Trust me, I've been to the hospital. I've had to go to the ER, and the medical bills are insane. And so that's going to discourage people. Tax cuts and incentives, right? If you have more children, perhaps a reduced raising minimum wage, right? I think this would definitely encourage individuals to have children, right? So they could feel like they could provide for their children. Decrease over limit abortion, increase immigration, and have children at younger age. Yeah, this would be kind of tough though, right? Because a lot of people are worried, like if I have children early on, will I pursue my career? Will I ever go back to school? And so maybe we could kind of create a program where it's like, okay, maybe there's some financial assistance or even just some family planning involved in saying, okay, if you want to have a child earlier on in your life, you're 19, you're 20, whatever, we have this program where, we'll help you, we'll make sure that you know everything you need to know, prenatal, and then, postpartum and taking care of the baby. And then we'll have a program where we can get you back into school. And believe it or not, a lot of colleges actually have daycares built into them. And what's really neat is in the daycares, you've got professionally licensed daycare individuals, daycare workers, but then you also have students who are maybe pursuing degrees in elementary education or, pre-K education. And so they can get training right there on the campus. And then the people who are attending college have kids are getting free daycare. It's a wonderful idea. All right. So in regards to Unit 3, all right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because on my screen, I'm actually going to pull up y'all's exam. And I'm going to read you some questions just so you can have an idea of what you need to be studying. So maybe you want to get out a paper and pencil or go ahead and open up a Google Doc, right? So I'm just going to give you the main ideas that you need to make sure to reflect on. All right. Okay. So obviously we've been talking a lot about populations. And one of the worries about people and conservation efforts is carrying capacity. So make sure you can fully wrap your mind around carrying capacity. Make sure that you can, interpret graphs and data in regards to carrying capacity, periods of exponential growth, what happens if you overshoot the carrying capacity. Let's see here. What else we got? We got a lot of age structure diagrams, right? Those population pyramids. Can you recognize a rapidly growing population, a slow growing population, a stable population, and a decreasing population? Make sure you can identify all of those. Again, there are 3 questions that are just about total fertility rates. So make sure to know why some countries have high TFRs, why some countries have low, and what can be done to change that. be able to kind of go back and understand, okay, what makes a generalist species or a specialist species a specialist species? Yep, another generalist and specialist species question. Making sure to understand how generalists and specialists deal with changing environments. Who likes stable environments and who can tolerate changes in their environments? What determines whether or not they'll survive? Don't forget about like limiting factors and things. Don't forget about R strategists and K strategists, right? Remember, R strategists are organisms that reproduction, right? They want rapid reproduction, live fast, die young, have lots of babies. Whereas K selected species, right? Slower growing, slower to mature, have fewer offspring. They're looking to get to carrying capacity and they're looking to stay there. More case selected and R selected questions. Another case selected and R selected question. Don't forget about the survivorship curves, y'all. You get type 1, type 2, and type 3. Remember, type 1 is late loss. Organisms are very likely to live into old age and die of old age. Type 2 is constant loss, right? The mortality rate is kind of the same across the age demographic groups. And then type 3, again, is that live fast, die young. You've got a lot of the offspring dying and very few individuals living into adulthood. Those that live into adulthood are tough little buggers. Usually bugs have type 3. So survivorship curve, another survivorship curve. A question about carrying capacities and how resources affect them. Questions about the current human population trends. Know about population density. Remember, people per square mile. What is the rule of 70? Remember, 70 divided by R, the growth rate, can give us the doubling time, right? How quickly the population can grow, right? So it's doubling time calculated with the growth rate. What are the differences between density independent and density dependent factors, right? So these are factors that affect populations. Density dependent factors are kind of exasperated by an increasing population density, right? Things like disease, competition, available resources, right? Those things get more intense as the population becomes more densely populated. Density independent factors will affect populations equally, whether there's 100 individuals per square mile or 1,000, things like natural disasters, for example. Demographic transitions, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Phase 1, high birth rate, high death rate, population's not changing much. Phase 2, modern medicine, sanitation, death rate drops, birth rate remains high, so you have a rapid rate of population growth. Stage 3, we're industrial now, right? And so the birth rate's decreasing because women are going to work, they're having equitable access to education, right? So birth rates coming down. Stage 4 is birth rates and death rates are approaching, a similar rate. And so population growth rates decrease as well. And then technically stage 5 would be a declining population because the birth rate fell below the death rate. Let's see, another question about demographic transitions. I would study that last slide of the Unit 3 PowerPoint because it's got a lot of good info about demographic transitions. Yep, and so it's 24 questions. It's not bad. It's not going to take you a long time. I would set aside, a good 45 minutes to an hour tomorrow to do it, so you can spend a minute or two on each question. Make sure to read each question and each answer choice very, very carefully, okay? Yeah, so that's all I have for class today. Don't forget, right now, go ahead and start Hans Rosling's Don't Panic, okay? Because it's going to give you a lot of great info, and it's kind of like studying in a more entertaining way. If you guys have any questions while you're studying or questions tomorrow, please don't hesitate to ask. I did record this, right? And so I am going to put this on the YouTube channel. So if you're like, oh man, what did he say to study? You can watch this later. Does anyone have any questions? All right, well, you got 30 more minutes of class time, so you can go ahead and watch half of that video and then watch the other half later when you're all done with your classes. And I will see you guys on Thursday. Don't forget your progress check tomorrow.